The RBA gallops the official cash rate to 2.85% with inflation tipped to hit 8% today. We're going to talk about everything that's happened with the Reserve Bank's recent announcement. So Jaden, starting off at the top, what actually happened?
The Reserve Bank of Australia met earlier today for their November 2022 meeting and have decided to increase cash rate by 0.25%. So that's the second month in a row at the same 0.25%, but the seventh time this year that the Reserve Bank has decided to increase the cash rate. Now, like Nathan said, it's off the back of some pretty high inflation data. So the Reserve Bank's target band for inflation is at 2 to 3%. And the latest reading for inflation has put it at around 7% annualized for the year. So it's much higher than what they expected. But I guess in line with some of the countries overseas, we've seen similar cases with Europe, in America as well, with the Fed over there. There's a problem that's not really going away. Now, Nathan, a big question on a lot of people's lips is, how's this going to affect me individually? What is it going to do to, I guess, firstly, homeowners? So let's start with that. What are you sort of seeing with borrowing impact with this latest interest rate rise?
We've seen 7 rate rises in the last 7 months, and this has had a real impact on your borrowing ability. That's reduced by about 30% now. If you have an application in progress with a lender, some of them are actually going to reassess your position based on this latest increase, and your assessment rate will actually mean that your borrowing power is reduced again. Some lenders have pre-approvals that you pre-approved and locked in at that assessment rate that you're initially pre-approved at, so you might not be impacted. But nonetheless, we are finding that the market is suffering as a result of reduced borrowing power. We have talked about the lag effects. So Commonwealth Bank talks about a lot in that these rate increases take some time to follow through in the economy. And it's expected that inflation will start to come back down next year. As we talked about earlier, it's widely expected that we're going to peak inflation at 8%, which is likely to come in later this year. And then in 2023, it to come back down. Jaden, if you're a borrower, you have a mortgage, you've been hit 7 times now with 7 increases, what can you actually do?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of conversations this week around fixed rates. Do fixed rates make sense? What should I do? It's going to be case by case. I think a lot of investors I've seen over the last couple of weeks have been going to fixed rates to kind of hedge their bets a little bit. We're seeing the 2-year fixed rates. There are a couple of banks that had specials there. It's sort of for owner occupied at 4.99. They've actually gone back up closer to 6% now. But like I said, for a lot of investors, they're sort of making the switch across to fixed to say, well, I'm going to do interest only for 1, 2, 3 years, not have to think about it. It's going to be done and locked in there. For owner occupied, it's probably not as easy an equation. If it's investment property, you know what your rent's going to be for the next year or 2 years. Broadly, you can have a lease in place for that time. You can model expenses and know what it's going to be. For owner occupied rate, it's a pretty tricky one because, like you've said before, Nathan, different banks have got different models. Some are saying that potentially as quick as the rates have gone up, they could start come down later next year. So what's some of the forecasts you've seen there as well?
Depends on the lender. So we've seen a very sort of response from a lot of economists. Some of the lenders like CommBank is very, more conservative. They're saying there's likely to be one more rate rise coming in December this year by another 0.25%. And then that's where they're saying it's going to peak. If you listen to Westpac, they're sort of saying 3.6%. Jane, what can you do if you have a mortgage at the moment and you're feeling the pain?
There's potentially ways that you can renegotiate with the current lender to see if they can get a better deal. If that doesn't work, even try and give your bank a call and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, I've seen some better rates online on your website. Oftentimes, there's what they call a bit of a loyalty tax where the banks give better and bigger discounts to newer customers and kind of forget about us, the existing customers. So if you call them up, you give them a bit of a slap between the face and say like, hey, give me a better rate. 9 times out of 10, they're going to come to the party, at least give you something better than what you're getting. Not always necessarily the rates that they're getting new customers. Yeah, otherwise, thirdly, you can potentially look at changing lenders. There's banks out there that are paying thousands of dollars in cashbacks and bonuses to switch lenders, and you might get, and likely will get, a better rate at the same time. So you can look at that. If you've got investment property, having more and more conversations around switching from principal and interest only terms to sort of help with some of that cash flow and do that. And it was a big strategy a few years ago. I think it's coming back now with sort of rates of where they're getting. Even for investors, some people are sort of looking at potentially extending loan terms. It's a whole situation. Obviously, it depends on your situation. I'm probably not going to answer that this video. There's a lot more to go through. We'll cover that at a different time. But yeah, definitely use your feet, and check out other lenders that a broker like us can help out with.